Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together.
I am more than delighted to welcome back Norah Casey, who's going to talk about a subject that's really dear to her heart, which is solo travel, and solo travel based around women's experiences as well. And as you know, Norah is a well-known broadcaster, publisher, Dragon's Den, but most importantly, recently she came out with Planet Women Travel, which is an online and print magazine, which is sort of dedicated to women's travel in particular. So you're very welcome, Norah.
Thanks very much.
So tell us a little bit about why you enjoy traveling as a woman.
There's more and more women who have decided to travel and to travel alone. I would say that my journey towards solo travel was just because I loved traveling and I didn't have anyone else to go with. It was forced on me in many ways, you know. Now I embrace it and I'm utterly selfish about it. I love the fact that I can have a lie-in wherever I am, or I can get up and do what I decided I was going to do. There's no one's needs or wants that are more important than mine, which is wonderful. I would say that I've learned a few things along the way. For one thing, I plan a lot more in advance. So I wouldn't go to a destination without, first of all, thinking very carefully about where I stay. So although some of the accommodations outside of a city centre, if I was going to a city, might be cheaper, I think I always fear I might get stuck there without getting a taxi or an Uber or public transport to get back to where I'm staying. So I like being safe and I like being in the centre of town where I can walk everywhere. I also check out a little bit in advance any activities I want to do. I don't leave everything to chance, and I certainly leave enough time to change things if I want, but I usually book some group activities because it's nice just to have company. That could be cycling. It could be a walking tour. I love doing cooking ones just because they're great fun and it's impossible not to meet people and talk to people.
Have a laugh.
And have a laugh. I love finding hotels that have solo rooms. And increasingly, things like cruise ships and others, they have solo salons as well as solo rooms. So they're catering more and more for people who want to travel alone.
What's the advantage of the solo salon?
Well, so interestingly, Norwegian, I was doing a cruise with Norwegian last year. They said solo travellers are so important to us. We actually have 48 rooms that are for solo lone wanderers. And we have a special salon where they can meet and greet. It's quite nice, actually, if you're on your own on a ship, which is quite big, and there's lots of couples and lots of families. You're in this tiny little ship within a ship, and everybody there is a solo traveller. Not for dating purposes. It's just nice to meet somebody who's like you, on their own, who probably is interested in having a cup of coffee in the morning or having a chat. It's a nice safe space to sort of say hello to people. So I think if the hotel has catered for solo travellers, it's fantastic. The first thing I do in every destination is I go for a walk. So I'm an early morning walker and I usually head out at 6 a.m. and I get my bearings. It's the first thing I do. No matter what time I arrive at, I go walking, I find out where everything is. Where's that local bus? What buildings, architecture, parks are nearby? I find out in advance if there's safe places, if there's unsafe places that I need to know about. I mark out maybe a place I might go back to for lunch. I just get a full feel of the place. So I walk every morning and that's how I figure out, I think, the places that I know I want to be in and the places I don't necessarily want to be in late at night. I would say I'm not a nervous traveller. I travel all my life, but I do print out everything. So I have a couple of times the battery on my phone went dead at the critical moment of me checking in. We always remember the outage there about 3 months ago when people were queuing at airports with hard copies because they couldn't use their phones, the Microsoft issue. I feel a lot safer if I have copies of my passport, copies of my reservations. So a little bit old-fashioned, but when you're on your own and the only person minding you is you, I always feel safer if I have those things. I also use a couple of apps where my family know where I am. So I share my location. They know where I am, especially if I'm in the back of beyonds of Rajasthan or something, so that people know where I am and there's an expectation of when I might check in and when I mightn't check in. Much easier nowadays than when I was doing it when I was younger. I used to have to use the hotel phone, which was an arm and a leg, so you'd only phone once a week. So I'd say the second thing I do is I pack a big bag of confidence. Because I'm not necessarily, I know I speak for a living and I do TV and stuff, but actually I'm not necessarily a mixer. I'm quite quiet. And I used to sort of sit in a restaurant and I'd have a book and it would be precariously leaning against a jug of water and I'd be pretending to read the pages so that I didn't appear like I was on my own. And of course, what that was doing was putting everybody else off saying hello to me. And I was definitely not, it was more an endurance. I do tend to turn the day around. I start very early. I do lots of stuff during daytime hours. I don't stay out late at night. I mean, just going back to my point about if you're minding yourself, you definitely don't want to be overdoing alcohol. I'm sorry to be a nag about that, but that's the truth. You definitely don't want to be on your own sitting in a bar and not necessarily fully compass mentis about what's happening to you. So I'm always very careful about that. And I get back to the hotel room or wherever I'm staying quite early. I like to stay in apartments. I'd say 9 times out of 10, I stay in apartments rather than hotels.
Any particular reason for
I
that?
just love making my own cup of tea in the morning. I like sitting reading a book on the sofa. There's something quite nice and intimate about staying in a place within the city that isn't a hotel. When you think about Dublin, people would always say, and I stayed in such and such a hotel. And you'd be like, I've never heard of that. Because tourists come in and they stay in places that we would never even visit. They go to places that sometimes we don't visit. I always like to think that if I go into a strange city or a strange place, that I'm staying somewhere that's a neighbourhood,
Yes.
and getting to know it a little bit better.
Yes. Have you had any experiences that were worrisome for you?
Yes, a couple of, I would say, never in the places like I did 3 weeks in Delhi, New Delhi, Udaipur, Rajasthan, off to the Taj Mahal. Never felt unsafe once. And I've done Africa, I'd say 12, 13 times, month-long treks on the Serengeti. I'm a mad animal nut, so I'm always out trekking rhinos and living in 2-man tents on the side of the Zambezi. So never felt unsafe, not once in Africa. But definitely in the States, there's parts of Washington, which I used to go up there a lot, and I've learned where not to go. I was just back from Chicago, some spectacularly beautiful parts to that city, but way beyond the skyscrapers. But there's definitely parts that I wouldn't venture into, that I feel unsafe. I'm walking down the street. I'm conscious all the time of looking behind me. I listen for echoes to footsteps. I don't go down dark alleyways, even if it makes the journey a little bit longer. If I am going from A to B from somewhere quite far out, I'll always get an Uber, which are safe. At least I know the name of the person. I'm not jumping into a taxi and not knowing who's driving the taxi. So I can track it. I probably feel more unsafe in big cities than I ever do in the wilds of, these beautiful countries that I love exploring.
What do you think is the biggest challenge talking to other women and for women traveling on their own, which they're doing in increasing numbers?
Exactly.
Female solo traveling is a growth market.
Which ended up being why I launched Planet Woman Travel, because to be honest, I was going to launch a generic travel magazine and I went out 1.5 years ago to all the agencies in London and across Ireland. I was trying to find the niche and I was convinced there wasn't one because travel magazines are very prolific. So then I realised there wasn't one for women. Secondly, that like me, more and more women get to a certain age and the children have grown up and they've never explored the world and maybe they lost the husband along the way. Maybe not the same way I did, but maybe they made some decisions that they wanted to live their own life. They're polar opposites to social influencers. So all I'd say is, if you delve into that world a little, I certainly have been on trips where there's been young people who don't really appreciate the level and depth of where they're there. So they fly across the other side of the world to take a selfie. But that's their idea of enjoying that place. My idea is to spend a lot of alone time, to just like the wonderment of exploring your own head, calming it down, appreciating everything that's in front of you, not packing the day with stuff, because the whole point of you being there is to try and find that expression in your head, which diffuses what you've just looked at during the day,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've both traveled in Asia a lot and we've been talking about Cambodia and Nepal, where I was recently, and that influence of Buddhism, which is really about getting some quiet time and reflecting on the fact we're not here forever. And that's not a morbid thing either.
Yeah.
Because when you actually reflect on your own mortality and the fact that this is a short stay here, it can sharpen the flavour of the short stay here. As we know, we've all lost people close. You've lost your husband. I've lost my 2 younger brothers, parents. It's going to come calling. And it's so much better to be prepared for that.
Everybody wants immersive experiences now. And that's not to say fly and flop holidays aren't great, because there's certainly a couple of places I go to fly and flop and I don't want anything. I don't want any culture.
No.
I don't want any museums. I don't want to see any spectaculars. I just want my book and lovely sun and sand. But I can't do that for very long. But the one thing I'd say, what terrifies me, the reason I'm more and more doing sustainable travel, is we're talking all the time about the passenger cap at Dublin Airport, about climate change, about the emissions that planes put into the sky. And although we're talking about electric, Iceland Air has an electric plane. It can only go about for an hour. And I wouldn't trust those batteries myself at the moment. But there are ways in which planes are going to change in the future and they will be less harmful to the environment. But at the moment, because they go through the clouds at high altitude, they do actually cause some problems for climate. So I imagine a world with my grandchildren or great-grandchildren where they won't be able to go to these places. Yeah. And maybe through over-tourism, which is another issue, these places won't be accessible. So if I go there, I want to just really absorb it. I want to really feel the history and the culture and get to know the people and see all the magic it has. I went to Dubai and you'd think, well, what's pretty about Dubai? Well, I got up at 3:30 in the morning and I went on a balloon ride to watch the sunrise above the desert. And it was one of the most beautiful spiritual things I'd done in a while. So everywhere you go, there's somewhere beautiful, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's just a state of mind looking at that and being aware of that. I feel we're in a golden age of travel. I travel a lot with my two grandkids. I take them skiing. We've done lots of different sort of even podcasts with them. They're 10 and 7. And I find that they may not have the opportunities we have now. This could be the golden age because of that, because of the environmental impacts. What would you share with our listeners, many of whom are women? Maybe they have a reluctance or they have a fear. What's the common fear you hear from women? And what would be your answer to that as to why one should travel?
The two fears that most women have when they travel solo is, one, they don't feel that they could enjoy their own company. That's a big fear. And the first time I went away on my own, I was the worst company for myself. I was not good company and I dreaded it and I hated being on my own and nobody to talk to. So you really have to try hard to sit at the counter, to do those experiences, to get to know other people and to have the confidence to talk to people because most people will talk to you. And the second is the fear of being on their own. Like there is a legitimate fear amongst most women about traveling to strange places where there might be crime or where they might be putting themselves in an endangerment. And that's all about planning. Like I wrote a big long article in the current issue, it's only just gone to press, of Planet Woman Travel, and it is all about that preparation. So for me, there's nothing spontaneous. I used to think that travel was spontaneous. Hop on a plane and go somewhere. No, if you're traveling on your own, you plan in advance. You know where you're going, choose the safe parts of the city, figure out the transport, download the apps, speak some of the language, make sure that you orientate yourself to where you are the minute you come. Turn your day around like I do. I mean, there's so much that you can cram into daylight hours. You don't need to be out late at nighttime when it might be a little bit less safe to be around. It's a terrible thing to say, just dive right in. But that's the truth. Once you do it the first time, you think, well, I didn't have Mary saying she wanted to go swimming and Breda moaning about needing to go to the theatre and somebody else wanted to go to a certain restaurant. There was a row about it. It's just so glorious to just decide yourself what you want to do. Yeah. All day, every day. It's beautiful.
Yes. If someone was going to try this for the first time, whether for whatever the reason, what sort of destinations around Europe?
Yeah. Well, Venice, because I've just been there for 6 days of walking and it's really, really safe. And there's so many beautiful, like Venice to me is like walking through an open air museum. There's everywhere your eye gazes, there's something beautiful. So being on your own in that environment is just stunning because you're walking into beautiful campos. You're sitting there drinking a lovely glass of rosé. You've got children playing. You've got beautiful buildings to look at. There's plenty of indoor activities. It's not a late night place. You'll be very comfortable, as I was, sitting in the evening time and having your supper, your plate of pasta in a lovely, beautiful setting outdoors and home in bed at 9 o'clock. Very, very safe. I've done Munich on my own and I feel Munich is a really, really accessible city to be around. Paris, I worked in Paris for 7 years. I'm there this weekend. There's parts of Paris that you need to be really, really careful around, but there are other parts where you can safely walk in the streets.
Would you be recommending Airbnb-ing it or hosteling it or hoteling it or pensione? What would you recommend?
I try to go to a local rental agency. So in Venice, I went to a local rental agency, which is a Venice-based apartment rental. Spoke to them myself a few times in advance, didn't do it all online, made sure they knew that I was travelling and when I was coming. And they were great. They met me off the Vaporata and escorted me to where I was going. And they were at the other end of the phone if I needed them anytime. So wherever possible, I'll go to a local rental agency, not Airbnb. That's not to say that Airbnb hasn't got some great options. I'm just on this sustainable travel mode at the moment, and I'm trying to do things a bit differently. It just depends on the location. If you're going to Washington, which I was just talking about, or New York and places like that, it's increasingly hard to get apartments that are affordable. So you're better off going into a local hotel then. For me, it's always the area.
Yes.
Because late at night going in and out of hotels is not good if you're not in a good area. So it may be worth just spend a little bit more to make sure you're in a safe place, even if the room is tiny.
But you're really encouraging, particularly women, to try the solo experience, even for a couple of nights.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And keep your bags with you. Nowadays, they're getting lost. And if you're on your own, that's not good if you don't have your bag and your bits and pieces and whatever your necessities are.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for that. You shared some wonderful tips and that imperative to go out there and explore this world while we can.
Yeah, you deserve it.
Yes. Thank you, Norah.